Hashtag the Albino Feline. The metallic taste of recycled air filled Jake Morrison's lungs as he crawled through the maintenance tunnel beneath Mining Platform 7. His headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing a maze of pipes, cables, and the occasional scurrying maintenance bot that had gone rogue. The platform's artificial gravity felt lighter here in the bowels of the structure, making each movement feel slightly disconnected from reality. Jake had been working on Kepler 442c for 3 years now, ever since the divorce papers had been signed, and Earth had become too small to contain his broken dreams. The mining moon orbited a gas giant in a system that most humans consider the edge of nowhere, but for Jake, it was exactly where he needed to be. Far from memories, far from questions, far from the life he'd failed to build. The work order on his tablet read simply, Water Recycling System Failure, Section 7 Delta. Simple enough, except nothing on this floating hunk of metal, and desperation was ever simple. The Zalarian Corporation that owned the mining rights here had a tendency to cut corners, and those corners usually ended up being Jake's problem to fix. As he rounded a corner in the tunnel system, his headlamp illuminated something that shouldn't have been there. A small, white shape pressed against the far wall of the tunnel, barely visible among the shadows cast by the industrial piping. Jake paused, his engineer's mind immediately cataloging what he was seeing. Too small to be a person, too organic to be equipment, and definitely alive based on the slight rise and fall he could detect. He moved closer, his boots making soft metallic taps against the grated flooring. The shape resolved into something that made Jake's heart skip a beat. It was a creature, roughly the size of a house cat, with pure white fur that seemed to glow in the harsh LED light from his headlamp. Its eyes were closed, and Jake could see that it was breathing, but barely. The creature was soaked to the bone, lying in a small pool of what looked like contaminated water that had leaked from a nearby pipe. Jake had seen many species during his time in space. The galaxy was full of life, most of it either indifferent to humans or actively hostile. But this creature was unlike anything he'd encountered. Its fur was completely white, almost translucent, and its features were distinctly feline despite clearly being alien in origin. Small gills fluttered weakly along its neck, suggesting it was adapted for both air and water breathing. The creature's breathing was labored, and Jake could see that it was in bad shape. Someone or something had clearly dumped it here to die. The thought made his stomach churn. In his 3 years on the platform, Jake had learned that space had a way of hardening people, making them forget the basic decency that separated civilization from chaos. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. Jake set down his toolkit and approached the creature slowly. He'd learned basic xenobiology during his engineering training, enough to know that touching an unknown alien species without protection was generally a bad idea. But looking at the small, dying creature, academic caution seemed less important than simple human decency. He pulled off his work gloves and gently touched the creature's side. Its fur was incredibly soft, like silk that had been woven from moonlight. The creature's skin felt cold, too cold, and Jake could feel how thin it had become. Whatever had happened to it, it hadn't eaten in days. The creature's eyes fluttered open at his touch. They were the most striking feature Jake had ever seen on any living being. Large, expressive, and completely white except for pale blue irises that seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what Jake had expected. The creature looked up at him, and Jake felt a strange connection form in that moment, as if the universe had suddenly shifted to bring them together. The creature tried to lift its head, but was too weak. A soft sound escaped its throat, not quite a meow, but something similar, filled with pain and exhaustion. Jake felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Not since Sarah had left, taking their plans for family with her, had Jake felt this overwhelming need to protect something helpless. He looked around the tunnel system, his engineer's mind already working through the logistics. He couldn't leave the creature here. The contaminated water was clearly toxic, and the temperature in the maintenance tunnels dropped to near freezing during the platform's night cycle. The creature would be dead within hours if he left it. But taking it with him presented its own challenges. Keeping unauthorized life forms on the platform was strictly against Zalarian Corporation regulations. The penalty was immediate termination of contract and deportation back to Earth. For someone like Jake, who had burned most of his bridges and had nowhere else to go, that was essentially a death sentence of a different kind. Jake found himself thinking about his father, who had been a mechanic back on Earth before the automation revolution had made human mechanics largely obsolete. His father had always said that a man's character was measured not by what he did when people were watching, but by what he did when nobody was looking. Right now, in a tunnel beneath a mining platform at the edge of human space, nobody was looking. The creature made that soft sound again, weaker this time. Jake could see that it was fading fast. Decision made. He carefully scooped the creature up in his arms. It weighed almost nothing, just fur and bones and a heartbeat that felt too rapid against his chest. The creature's head lolled against his shoulder, and Jake could feel its labored breathing against his neck. He tucked the creature inside his work jacket, zipping it up enough to keep it secure, but not so tight that it couldn't breathe. The warmth from his body seemed to help immediately, and the creature's breathing became slightly less labored. Jake grabbed his toolkit with his free hand and began making his way back through the tunnel system toward his quarters. The journey felt longer than usual, every step calculated to avoid jarring the injured creature. Jake's quarters were in the lower levels of the residential section, a small space that he'd chosen specifically because it was away from the main foot traffic areas. Privacy had been important to him when he'd first arrived on the platform, and now it might be the difference between life and death for his unexpected companion. As he walked, Jake found himself talking quietly to the creature, even though he had no idea if it could understand him. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "I know it doesn't look like much, but I've got a place where you'll be safe. Food, water, somewhere warm to sleep. Just hang out a little longer." The creature's eyes opened again, looking up at Jake with what seemed like understanding. There was something almost human in that gaze, an intelligence that made Jake wonder about the creature's origins. Where had it come from? How had it ended up in the maintenance tunnels? And why did someone want it dead badly enough to dump it in contaminated water? These questions would have to wait. Right now, survival was the priority. Jake reached his quarters and used his keycard to unlock the door, quickly stepping inside and sealing it behind him. His living space was spartanly furnished. A bed, a small desk, a food preparation unit, and a tiny bathroom with a sonic shower. It wasn't much, but it was clean and private, and most importantly, it was warm. Jake gently extracted the creature from his jacket and placed it on his bed. Under the full lighting of his quarters, he could see more details that had been hidden in the tunnel. The creature's fur wasn't just white. It had subtle patterns of pale silver that created an almost ethereal appearance. Its ears were pointed and mobile, constantly adjusting to track sounds. Its paws were larger than a terrestrial cat's, with retractable claws and what looked like small webbing between the toes, further evidence of its aquatic adaptations. The creature was clearly dehydrated and malnourished. Jake went to his food preparation unit and began looking through his supplies. He had water purification tablets, some protein paste, and a few packages of dried fruit that he'd been hoarding from his last supply delivery. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He started with water, filling a small bowl with purified water and placing it near the creature's head. The creature's nose twitched at the smell of clean water, and it managed to lift its head enough to drink. Jake watched as the creature took small, careful sips, its pink tongue working to lap up as much as possible. The relief in its movements was palpable. Next, Jake mixed a small amount of protein paste with water to create a thin soup. The paste wasn't appetizing by human standards, but it was nutritionally complete and easy to digest. He offered a small amount on his finger, and the creature sniffed it cautiously before beginning to eat. Its appetite was weak, but Jake could see that it was making an effort. As the creature ate and drank, Jake found himself studying it more carefully. The intelligence in its eyes was undeniable, and its behavior suggested a level of sophistication that went beyond simple animal instinct. The way it looked at him, the careful way it moved despite its weakness, the almost purposeful way it responded to his voice, all of it suggested that this was not just some random alien pet that had been abandoned. Jake's tablet chimed with an incoming message. The work order for the water recycling system was overdue, and the shift supervisor was asking for a status update. Jake quickly typed a response, claiming that the repair was more complex than expected and would require additional time. It was a lie, but a plausible one. The platform's systems were old and prone to unexpected complications. He would have to complete the repairs soon, but right now his priority was making sure the creature survived the night. Jake pulled a spare blanket from his storage locker and carefully covered the creature. The white fur seemed to absorb the warmth immediately, and for the first time since he'd found it, the creature looked almost peaceful. As Jake sat on the edge of his bed, watching the creature's breathing slowly stabilize, he found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Keeping an unauthorized alien life form was just the beginning of his problems. Eventually, someone would notice. Platform security was surprisingly thorough when it came to biological contamination protocols, and hiding the creature indefinitely would be nearly impossible. But looking at the small, helpless being that was slowly recovering under his care, Jake realized that he didn't care about the consequences. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. Not fixing machinery or maintaining corporate profits, but actually saving a life. The creature's eyes opened again, and it looked directly at Jake. In that moment, Jake felt a strange sensation, as if something was touching the edge of his consciousness. It lasted only a second, but it left him with a distinct impression that the creature was trying to communicate with him, trying to express gratitude in the only way it could. Jake reached out slowly and gently stroked the creature's head. Its fur was incredibly soft, and he could feel a faint purring vibration that seemed to resonate through his fingertips. The creature's eyes closed in what looked like contentment, and Jake felt a smile cross his face for the first time in months. Outside his quarters, the mining platform continued its endless work, processing ore from the moon's surface and preparing it for transport to the inner systems. The rhythm of industrial machinery provided a constant backdrop of noise that Jake had long since learned to ignore. But tonight, with the small alien creature resting on his bed, the sound seemed different somehow. Less harsh, less mechanical, almost like a lullaby. Jake settled into his desk chair, planning to keep watch over his unexpected guest through the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make. But tonight, in the quiet of his small quarters, he felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. Purpose. The creature needed him, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Hashtag the Albino Feline. Continued. Jake woke to the sound of his morning alarm, the harsh beeping pulling him from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in months. For a moment, he forgot about his unexpected guest, but then he saw the small white form curled up on his bed, and the memories came flooding back. The creature was still sleeping, its breathing now steady and regular. The improvement from the night before was remarkable. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing his guest, Jake prepared for his shift. The water recycling system repair couldn't be delayed any longer without raising suspicions. As he gathered his tools, he found himself glancing frequently at the creature, worried about leaving it alone. But it seemed stable now, and he'd left out fresh water and a small amount of food. Before leaving, Jake knelt beside the bed and gently touched the creature's head. Its eyes opened immediately, alert and aware. Again, he felt that strange sensation, as if something was brushing against his thoughts. The creature made a soft, chirping sound, almost like gratitude, and Jake felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he whispered. "Stay hidden, okay? And try to get some more rest." The creature seemed to understand, settling back down and closing its eyes. Jake sealed his quarters and headed for the maintenance tunnels, his mind already racing through the day's challenges. The water recycling repair turned out to be a straightforward replacement of corroded filtration elements, exactly the kind of routine work that Jake could do in his sleep. But as he worked, his thoughts kept returning to the creature in his quarters. Who did it belong to? How had it ended up nearly dead in the maintenance tunnels? And why did he feel such a strong connection to something he'd known for less than 12 hours? As Jake finished the repair, his tablet chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the platform's chief xenobiologist. The message was brief but concerning. Increased bioscanner readings in Section 7. Running sweep protocols. Report any unusual organic signatures immediately. Jake's blood ran cold. Bioscanners were standard equipment on all mining platforms, designed to detect potential biological contamination before it could spread to other systems. If Dr. Vasquez was running active sweeps, it meant something had triggered the sensors. Given the timing, Jake suspected that his rescue of the creature was about to become a much bigger problem. He finished his work quickly and headed back to his quarters, his mind racing through possible explanations and excuses. As he approached his door, he could hear voices from the corridor ahead. Two security officers were standing outside another resident's quarters, their conversation carrying in the recycled air. "Third sweep today," one of them was saying. "Whatever triggered the biosensors, it's somewhere in this section. Dr. Vasquez thinks it might be a contaminated food shipment, but the signature doesn't match any known pathogens." "Could be a stowaway," the other officer replied. "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried to smuggle something valuable off-world." Jake forced himself to walk casually past them, nodding politely as he headed to his own door. His keycard seemed to take forever to process, but finally the lock disengaged and he slipped inside. The creature was awake, sitting upright on his bed and looking remarkably better than it had the night before. Its white fur had regained some of its luster, and its eyes were bright and alert. But Jake could see something else in those pale blue eyes now, fear. The creature somehow knew that they were in danger. "We need to move you," Jake said quietly, kneeling beside the bed. "Security is doing biosweeps. They'll find you if you stay here." The creature tilted its head, and Jake was struck again by the intelligence in its gaze. It understood, not just the words, but the implications. Jake felt that strange mental touch again, stronger this time, and suddenly he had the distinct impression of images flashing through his mind. Water, darkness, fear, and something else, gratitude, and a deep, abiding trust. Jake shook his head, trying to clear the sensation. He didn't have time to analyze what was happening. He needed to find a safe place for the creature, somewhere the bioscanners couldn't detect it. His engineering knowledge kicked in, and he began mentally mapping the platform structure, looking for spaces that would be shielded from sensor sweeps. The answer came to him suddenly. The electromagnetic shielding around the platform's main fusion reactor created dead zones where bioscanners couldn't penetrate. The maintenance spaces around the reactor were off-limits to most personnel, requiring special clearance that Jake happened to have. It was dangerous. Radiation exposure was a constant risk, but it might be their only option. Jake gathered supplies quickly: food, water, a thermal blanket, and a portable radiation detector from his emergency kit. The creature watched his preparations with what seemed like understanding, making no attempt to flee despite clearly being capable of movement now. As Jake prepared a carrying case from his tool bag, his tablet chimed again. This time, it was a message from Platform Administrator Collins. "All section residents report to Security Station 3 for mandatory bioscreening. Effective immediately." Jake's heart pounded. Bioscreening would involve detailed scans that would definitely detect traces of the creature on his clothing and in his quarters. He had minutes, maybe less, before security came looking for him. He carefully placed the creature in the improvised carrier, surprised by how willingly it cooperated. As he lifted the bag, he felt that mental touch again, this time accompanied by what could only be described as determination. The creature was ready to fight for its survival, but it was trusting Jake to lead that fight. The journey to the reactor section felt like it took hours, though Jake's chronometer showed only 12 minutes. He used service corridors and maintenance shafts, avoiding the main thoroughfares where security patrols might spot him. The creature remained completely silent throughout the journey, as if it understood the need for stealth. The maintenance base Jake had chosen was a cramped utility room adjacent to the reactor's secondary cooling system. It was warm, well-ventilated, and completely shielded from external sensors. More importantly, it was a space that was only accessed during major maintenance cycles, which weren't scheduled for another 6 months. Jake set up the makeshift shelter quickly, arranging the supplies and making the space as comfortable as possible. The creature emerged from the carrier and immediately began exploring its new environment, its movements now graceful and confident. Whatever species it was, it adapted quickly to new situations. As Jake prepared to leave, the creature approached him and placed one small, webbed paw against his hand. The mental contact this time was unmistakable, a clear sense of gratitude mixed with something else. A promise, perhaps, or a pledge of loyalty. Jake found himself speaking aloud, even though he wasn't sure why. "I don't know what you are or where you came from," he said quietly. "But I know you don't deserve to die alone in a tunnel. I'll come back as soon as I can. Just try to stay safe, okay?" The creature made that soft, chirping sound again, and Jake could swear he saw understanding in its eyes. He sealed the utility room and made his way back to the main corridors, arriving at Security Station 3 just as his name was being called over the platform's communication system. The bioscreening process was thorough but routine. Jake submitted to the various scans and tests, his engineering training helping him maintain a calm demeanor even as his heart raced. The security technicians found nothing unusual, and Jake was clear to return to his duties. But as he left the security station, Jake overheard a conversation between Dr. Vasquez and Administrator Collins that chilled him to the bone. "The readings are definitely organic," Dr. Vasquez was saying. "Not terrestrial, highly intelligent based on the neural activity signatures. Whatever it is, it's somewhere on this platform." "Could it be dangerous?" Collins asked. "Unknown. But given the circumstances of how it appears to have arrived, I'd recommend treating it as a potential security threat. If it's what I think it is, we're dealing with something that shouldn't exist according to our current understanding of xenobiology." Jake forced himself to keep walking, but his mind was reeling. Dr. Vasquez clearly knew more about the creature than she was letting on. The phrase, "shouldn't exist," suggested that this wasn't just a random alien animal, but something much more significant. The rest of Jake's shift passed in a blur of routine maintenance tasks, his mind constantly returning to the creature hiding in the reactor section. When his shift finally ended, he made his way back to the utility room, carrying additional supplies he'd managed to gather without arousing suspicion. The creature was waiting for him, alert and healthy-looking. It had clearly been exploring the space, and Jake noticed that it had arranged the thermal blanket into a nest-like structure. The intelligence behind such behavior was obvious, and Jake found himself wondering once again about the creature's origins. As he sat down beside the improvised nest, the creature approached him fearlessly. This time, when it placed its paw against his hand, the mental contact was stronger and clearer. Images flashed through Jake's mind. Vast oceans under alien skies, cities of coral and crystal, beings that looked similar to the creature but larger and more sophisticated. And underneath it all, a sense of urgency and desperate need. The images faded, leaving Jake shaken but with a growing understanding. This wasn't just some pet that had been abandoned. This creature was a refugee, possibly the last of its kind, fleeing from something terrible. The intelligence he'd sensed wasn't just animal cunning. It was true sentience, possibly more advanced than human intelligence in some ways. Jake spent the next hour simply sitting with the creature, occasionally offering food or water, but mostly just providing companionship. The creature seemed to appreciate his presence, often making that soft chirping sound that Jake was beginning to interpret as contentment or gratitude. As the platform's night cycle began, Jake knew he would have to leave soon. The reactor section was patrolled during night shifts, and being found here would be impossible to explain. But before he left, the creature did something that surprised him. It moved to a small pile of metal shavings in one corner of the room and began arranging them into patterns. Jake watched in fascination as the creature created intricate geometric designs, each one more complex than the last. The patterns seemed almost mathematical in their precision, and Jake realized he was witnessing a form of communication. The creature was trying to tell him something, using the only medium available. One of the patterns looked familiar, and after a moment Jake recognized it as a simplified schematic of the platform's layout. Another showed what might have been a star map, with certain points emphasized. A third showed what appeared to be a timeline, with events marked at regular intervals. Jake pulled out his tablet and photographed the patterns, his engineer's mind already working to decode their meaning. If the creature was trying to communicate information about its origins, its purpose, or the danger it was fleeing from, these patterns might be the key to understanding the bigger picture. As Jake prepared to leave, the creature approached him one final time. The mental contact this time carried a sense of urgency, and Jake had the distinct impression that time was running out. Not just for the creature's immediate survival, but for something much larger and more important. Jake promised to return the next day with more supplies and, hopefully, some answers about the patterns. As he sealed the utility room and made his way back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was involved in something much bigger than a simple rescue. The creature's arrival on the platform wasn't random. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. That night, as Jake lay in his bed, analyzing the photographs of the creature's patterns, he began to see connections. The star map corresponded to known navigation routes in this sector. The timeline matched recent reports of system-wide communication blackouts. And the platform schematic showed areas that Jake recognized as the most heavily shielded locations on the structure. Whatever the creature was trying to tell him, it was important. Important enough that someone had tried to kill it rather than let it reach its destination. Important enough that Dr. Vasquez was conducting intensive biosweeps to find it. And important enough that Jake was willing to risk everything to protect it. As sleep finally took him, Jake's last thought was of the trust he'd seen in the creature's pale blue eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new decisions. But tonight, for the first time since leaving Earth, Jake felt like he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. The universe had brought them together for a reason, and Jake was determined to see that purpose through to the end. Hashtag the Albino Feline. Continued Jake's analysis of the creature's patterns yielded disturbing results. Cross-referencing the star map with recent galactic communication logs revealed a pattern of system failures and unexplained ship disappearances along the exact routes the creature had indicated. The timeline corresponded with reports from mining operations, trading posts, and even military installations going dark without explanation. Whatever was happening out there, it was big enough to threaten entire star systems. And somehow this small, white creature held crucial information about it. Jake arrived at his morning shift with a new sense of urgency. He needed to understand what the creature was trying to communicate, but more importantly, he needed to find a way to protect it from Dr. Vasquez's increasingly intensive search efforts. The biosweeps had expanded to include the entire platform, and it was only a matter of time before they reached the reactor section. His tablet chimed with a priority message from Engineering Command. Report to Chief Engineer Martinez immediately. Bring full diagnostic equipment. Jake's stomach dropped. Chief Martinez only called emergency meetings for major system failures or security incidents. Given the timing, Jake suspected his secret was about to become much more complicated. Chief Martinez's office was located in the command section of the platform, an area Jake rarely visited. The chief was a veteran engineer who had worked on deep space installations for over 20 years, and his reputation for spotting problems before they became disasters was legendary among the engineering staff. Morrison, Martinez said as Jake entered the office. We have a situation. The chief's desk display showed a complex readout of the platform's systems, with several areas highlighted in red. Jake recognized the patterns immediately. They were the same geometric designs the creature had created with metal shavings. These started appearing in our diagnostic systems 12 hours ago, Martinez continued. At first, we thought it was a software glitch or maybe some kind of virus. But the patterns are too sophisticated, too purposeful. Engineering Command thinks someone is trying to hack our systems, but I've never seen anything like this. Jake stared at the display, his mind racing. The creature wasn't just trying to communicate with him. It was somehow interfacing with the platform's computer systems. The implications were staggering. I want you to run a full diagnostic on the reactor section systems, Martinez said. If this is some kind of coordinated attack, the reactor would be the primary target. Check every system, every connection, every line of code. Find out how these patterns are appearing in our networks. Jake nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral. How long do I have? Vasquez is breathing down my neck about her biosweeps, and Administrator Collins is starting to panic about security breaches. I need answers by end of shift, or we're looking at platform-wide lockdown. A platform lockdown would mean restricted access to all sections, armed security patrols, and intensive screening of all personnel. The creature would be discovered within hours, and Jake didn't want to think about what would happen after that. Jake gathered his diagnostic equipment and made his way to the reactor section, his mind working through the implications of what he'd learned. If the creature could interface with computer systems, It wasn't just intelligent. It was technologically sophisticated beyond anything Jake had imagined. The question was whether it was trying to help or if its presence posed a genuine threat to the platform. When Jake reached the utility room, he found the creature waiting for him with obvious anxiety. Its usually pristine white fur was slightly ruffled, and its movements were agitated. As soon as Jake entered the room, the creature rushed to him, pressing its small body against his leg and making urgent chirping sounds. Jake knelt down, and the mental contact came immediately, stronger than ever before. This time, instead of images, Jake felt emotions, fear, urgency, and an overwhelming sense of running out of time. The creature was trying to warn him about something that was getting closer. "What is it?" Jake whispered. "What are you trying to tell me?" The creature moved to its collection of metal patterns, but instead of arranging new designs, it began destroying them systematically. Jake watched in confusion until he realized what was happening. The creature was erasing evidence, preparing to run again. Jake's tablet chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Vasquez. Biosignatures detected in Reactor Section 7. Security team dispatched. All maintenance personnel evacuate immediately. Jake's blood turned to ice. They had found the creature's hiding place. He had minutes before security arrived, and nowhere to run. The reactor section was the most heavily monitored area of the platform, with limited access points and constant surveillance. But as Jake prepared to grab the creature and make a desperate run for the maintenance shafts, something extraordinary happened. The lights in the utility room began to flicker in complex patterns, and Jake could hear the subtle sounds of the platform's computer systems cycling through rapid diagnostic routines. The creature had connected itself to the platform's networks and was doing something that Jake couldn't even begin to understand. The mental contact intensified, and suddenly, Jake was seeing through the creature's senses. He could feel the flow of data through the platform systems, see the digital representations of every person on the structure, track the movement of security teams through the corridors. It was like being plugged into the platform's nervous system, and the sensation was overwhelming. Through this connection, Jake could see the security team approaching their location. 4 armed officers with portable bioscanners, moving methodically through the reactor section. But he could also see something else, a way out that his human perception had missed. The creature broke the connection and moved to a maintenance panel Jake hadn't noticed before. With surprising strength for something so small, it began manipulating the controls, opening an access route to the platform's main ventilation system. The opening was barely large enough for Jake to crawl through, but it connected to a network of ducts that spanned the entire structure. "You want us to go through the air system?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. The creature chirped once and disappeared into the opening. Jake grabbed his essential equipment and followed, pulling the access panel closed behind him just as he heard voices approaching the utility room. The ventilation system was a maze of metal tunnels, some large enough to crawl through comfortably, others barely wide enough for Jake's shoulders. The creature moved through them with surprising confidence, clearly having mapped the entire system during its connection to the platform's networks. As they crawled through the ducts, Jake could hear the security team searching the utility room below. Their voices were muffled but audible, and Jake caught fragments of conversation that made his heart race. "Definitely something here," one officer was saying. "Bio readings are off the charts." "Whatever it was, it's gone now," another replied. "But look at this, someone's been living here. Food, water, bedding. This wasn't just a random contamination. Dr. Vasquez isn't going to like this. She thinks this thing might be connected to the system anomalies we've been tracking." The creature paused in its movement and looked back at Jake, its pale blue eyes reflecting the dim light filtering through the ventilation grates. Jake felt the mental contact again, this time carrying a clear message. They needed to reach the communications array. Jake understood immediately. If the creature could interface with the platform's computer systems, it could potentially access the long-range communication array and send a message to whoever it was trying to contact. But the communications array was located in the most secure part of the platform, surrounded by security checkpoints and electronic countermeasures. As they continued through the ventilation system, Jake found himself thinking about the patterns the creature had shown him. The star map, the timeline, the platform schematics. It was all connected to something larger, something that threatened more than just one mining platform at the edge of human space. The creature stopped at a ventilation grate that looked down into one of the platform's main corridors. Through the metal slats, Jake could see groups of personnel moving with obvious urgency. The platform's alert status had been elevated, and security teams were conducting systematic searches of every section. But Jake also noticed something else. The normal bustle of daily operations had been replaced by a tense, expectant atmosphere. People were moving with the kind of focused intensity that suggested they knew something big was coming, even if they didn't know exactly what. The creature began working on the grate's fasteners, its small claws surprisingly effective at manipulating the metal fixtures. As the grate came loose, Jake could hear voices from the corridor below. Dr. Vasquez and Administrator Collins engaged in what sounded like an urgent discussion. The biosignature is definitely non-terrestrial, Dr. Vasquez was saying. But the neural activity patterns are unlike anything in our xenobiology database. This isn't just some exotic pet or lab animal. This is something completely new. New how? Collins asked. The cognitive patterns suggest intelligence levels that rival or exceed human capacity. And the way it's been interfacing with our computer systems indicates technological capabilities that we don't understand. If this thing is hostile, Collins's response was interrupted by an alarm that began sounding throughout the platform. Jake recognized the tone immediately. Incoming ship alert. Someone was approaching the platform, and based on the alarm's intensity, it wasn't a scheduled arrival. The creature's agitation increased dramatically, and Jake felt a pulse of pure terror through their mental connection. Whatever was arriving wasn't here to rescue the creature. It was here to finish what someone had started when they dumped the creature in the maintenance tunnels to die. Jake and the creature remained motionless in the ventilation system as the platform's activity shifted from internal security concerns to external threat response. Through the grate, Jake could see personnel running toward their emergency stations, and the overhead speakers crackled with urgent announcements. All personnel to emergency stations. Unidentified vessel approaching. This is not a drill. The creature moved away from the grate with sudden purpose, leading Jake deeper into the ventilation system toward the communications array. But as they crawled through the metal tunnels, Jake could feel the platform shaking slightly, the vibrations of ships docking at the external airlocks. Whatever was coming for the creature had arrived, and Jake was beginning to understand that he wasn't just protecting one small alien life. He was standing between an innocent being and forces that would stop at nothing to silence it permanently. The creature's mental touch intensified, and Jake felt a flood of images and emotions. Cities burning under alien skies, ships fleeing through space, pursued by something dark and terrible, and underlying it all, a desperate mission to warn others about a threat that could consume entire civilizations. Jake looked at the small, white creature leading him through the darkness of the ventilation system, and he made a decision that would change everything. Whatever was happening here was bigger than one mining platform, bigger than corporate regulations, bigger than his own safety. The creature was trying to save lives on a scale that Jake could barely comprehend, and Jake was going to help it succeed, no matter what the cost. Hashtag the Albino Feline. Continued. The platform shuddered as the unknown ships completed their docking procedures. Through the ventilation system, Jake could hear the heavy footsteps of armed personnel moving through the corridors below, but these weren't the familiar sounds of human security forces. The rhythm was different, more deliberate, and accompanied by mechanical sounds that suggested advanced powered armor or robotic enhancement. The creature had led Jake to a section of the ventilation system that overlooked the communications array. Through a maintenance grate, Jake could see the array's central control room, a sophisticated chamber filled with quantum communication equipment capable of instantaneous contact with anywhere in the galaxy. But the room was now occupied by figures that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. They weren't human. The beings in the control room were tall, angular, and moved with a predatory grace that spoke of advanced evolutionary development. Their skin appeared to be a metallic blue-gray, and their faces were elongated with large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They wore form-fitting armor that integrated seamlessly with their physiology, and They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Jake had never seen this species before, but their presence here confirmed his worst fears. The creature he'd been protecting wasn't just a refugee. It was being hunted by a technologically advanced civilization that had somehow tracked it to this remote mining platform. The creature pressed against Jake's side, trembling with fear. Through their mental connection, Jake felt a flood of desperate communication. Images of entire worlds consumed by darkness, populations vanishing without trace, and these same hunters systematically eliminating anyone who tried to warn others about the approaching threat. The creature species called them the Void Hunters, and they were the advanced scouts of something far worse. The patterns the creature had been trying to communicate weren't just star maps and timelines. They were a warning about a systematic campaign of conquest that would consume every inhabited world in this sector of the galaxy. Jake watched as the Void Hunters began interfacing with the communications array, their technology seamlessly connecting with the platform systems. Whatever they were doing, it involved accessing the array's transmission logs and tracking the source of any outgoing messages. They were making sure that no warning could be sent to the outside galaxy. One of the Void Hunters moved to a secondary control panel and began what appeared to be a systematic scan of the platform's entire database. Jake realized with growing horror that they weren't just here to recapture the creature. They were here to eliminate any trace of its presence and any evidence that it had tried to communicate with others. The creature tugged at Jake's sleeve, directing his attention to a smaller access panel nearby. Jake understood immediately. The creature wanted to access the communications array directly, to bypass the Void Hunter's interference and send its warning message before it was too late. But reaching the access panel would require leaving the safety of the ventilation system and entering a corridor that was likely being patrolled by more Void Hunters. Jake felt his heart racing as he considered the risks, but the mental images the creature was sharing with him made the choice clear. If they failed here, entire civilizations would face extinction without warning. Jake carefully opened the ventilation grate and dropped into the corridor below, landing as quietly as possible on the metal deck plating. The creature followed, its movements completely silent despite its obvious fear. The corridor was empty for the moment, but Jake could hear the sound of systematic searching coming from nearby sections. The access panel was located behind a maintenance cover that required Jake's engineering codes to open. As he worked on the electronic lock, the creature kept watch, its sensitive ears tracking sounds that Jake couldn't detect. When the panel finally opened, revealing a complex array of fiber optic connections and quantum processing units, the creature immediately began to interface with the systems. Jake watched in amazement as the creature's small claws somehow connected directly with the quantum processors, its body beginning to glow with a soft, ethereal light. The mental connection between them intensified dramatically, and suddenly, Jake could feel the vast network of galactic communications flowing through his consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming. Jake could sense communication nodes across hundreds of star systems, feel the pulse of data flowing through quantum channels that spanned impossible distances, and perceive the subtle patterns that indicated which systems were still active and which had fallen silent. Through the creature's enhanced perception, Jake could see the true scope of the threat they were facing. The Void Hunters weren't just raiders or conquerors in the traditional sense. They were the harbingers of something that consumed entire civilizations, leaving nothing behind but empty space and dead worlds. And their campaign was accelerating, with more systems falling silent every day. The creature began transmitting its warning, pushing the message through quantum channels to every active communication node in the network. Jake felt the strain of the effort through their mental link. The creature was pushing itself beyond its physical limits to ensure the message reached as many recipients as possible. But their transmission was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the corridor. The Void Hunters had detected the unauthorized use of the communications array and were converging on their position. Jake could hear multiple sets of footsteps, moving with mechanical precision toward their location. The creature maintained its connection to the communication system, desperately trying to complete its transmission while Jake prepared to defend their position. He had no weapons except his engineering tools, but he was determined to buy the creature as much time as possible. The first Void Hunter rounded the corner and immediately spotted them. The being was even more imposing up close, standing nearly 7 feet tall with proportions that suggested both incredible strength and lightning-fast reflexes. Its multifaceted eyes focused on Jake and the creature with predatory intensity. The Void Hunter raised its weapon, but instead of firing immediately, it spoke in a voice that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. The words were in a language Jake had never heard, but somehow he understood them through his connection with the creature. Human, you have interfered with matters beyond your comprehension. Release the messenger, and you will be permitted to live. Jake positioned himself between the Void Hunter and the creature, who was still desperately working to complete its transmission. I don't think so, Jake replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The Void Hunter's weapon powered up with a high-pitched whine. You do not understand the forces you are opposing. The messenger's warnings are futile. The harvest cannot be stopped. Maybe not, Jake said, pulling a plasma cutter from his tool belt. But people have a right to know what's coming. They have a right to try to defend themselves. The Void Hunter paused, its multifaceted eyes studying Jake with what might have been curiosity. You would sacrifice your life for a being that is not of your species? This is unexpected. Jake felt the creature's mental presence intensify, sensing its gratitude and determination through their link. The transmission was nearly complete, but it needed just a few more seconds to ensure the message reached the maximum number of destinations. That's what humans do, Jake said simply. We protect those who can't protect themselves, even if it costs us everything. The Void Hunter's weapon powered down slightly, and Jake sensed confusion from the being. This behavior is not logical. It serves no evolutionary purpose. Maybe not, Jake admitted, but it's what makes us human. In that moment, the creature completed its transmission. Jake felt a pulse of triumph through their mental connection as the warning message propagated through the galactic communication network, reaching thousands of star systems simultaneously. The creature had succeeded in its mission. The galaxy would have advance warning of the approaching threat. The Void Hunter seemed to sense the completion of the transmission and raised its weapon again. But before it could fire, the platform's emergency alarms began sounding. Jake could hear explosions in the distance, and the sounds of human security forces engaging the Void Hunters in combat. Administrator Collins's voice echoed through the platform's communication system. All personnel evacuate to emergency pods. Platform is under attack by hostile alien forces. This is not a drill. The Void Hunter looked torn between eliminating Jake and the creature and responding to the broader battle taking place throughout the platform. In that moment of hesitation, Jake saw his opportunity. The message is already sent, Jake told the Void Hunter. Killing us won't stop it now. But if you leave us alone, maybe we can find a way to coexist instead of fighting a war that will destroy us all. The Void Hunter studied Jake for a long moment, its alien intelligence processing concepts that were clearly foreign to its understanding. Finally, it spoke again. You speak of coexistence, human, but the harvest has already begun. Your species and all others in this sector are scheduled for processing. The messenger's warnings may delay the inevitable, but they cannot prevent it. The creature finally disconnected from the communication system and moved to Jake's side. Through their mental link, Jake felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction at completing its mission, grief for its lost civilization, and, surprisingly, hope. The creature believed that its warning might make a difference, that the diverse species of the galaxy working together might find a way to resist the approaching threat. The sounds of battle were getting closer, and the Void Hunter seemed to reach a decision. Instead of attacking, it began backing away from their position. We will meet again, human, it said. When the harvest fleet arrives, remember that you could have lived in ignorance. Your compassion has doomed your species to face a truth that will destroy them. The Void Hunter disappeared around the corner, its footsteps fading as it presumably made its way back to its ship. Jake and the creature were left alone in the corridor, both shaken by the encounter, but alive. The creature looked up at Jake with its pale blue eyes, and the mental connection carried a clear message of gratitude. Jake knelt down and gently stroked the creature's white fur, feeling the soft purr that indicated contentment despite the dangerous circumstances. "We need to get to an evacuation pod," Jake said. "Whatever happens next, we're in this together." The creature chirped once in agreement, and together they began making their way toward the evacuation sections. Behind them, the platform continued to shake with the sounds of battle, but Jake felt a strange sense of peace. They had succeeded in their mission. The galaxy had been warned, and now it would be up to all the civilized species working together to find a way to survive what was coming. As they moved through the corridors, Jake couldn't help but think about the Void Hunter's words about human nature. The being had been genuinely puzzled by Jake's willingness to sacrifice for another species, unable to understand the compassion that motivated such actions. Maybe that incomprehension would be the key to defeating the approaching threat. If the enemy couldn't understand what made humans fight for others, they might not be prepared for the kind of resistance that compassion and cooperation could create. #the Albino Feline. Final 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the UEF battleship Defiance, watching as the largest military fleet in human history assembled around the Kepler 442 system. Ships from dozens of different species had answered the creature's warning, creating an alliance that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. The creature, whom Jake had named Luna for her silvery white appearance, sat on his shoulder, her small form a constant reminder of how the smallest acts of compassion could change the course of history. In the months since their escape from the mining platform, Luna had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy, living proof that cooperation between species was not only possible, but essential for survival. Through the viewport, Jake could see ships from the Altarian Confederation, the Crystalline Collective, the Biomechanical Union, and even representatives from species that had been considered hostile to human expansion. Luna's warning had reached them all, and the shared threat had accomplished what centuries of diplomacy had failed to achieve. Captain Sarah Chan approached the observation deck, her expression mixing professional concern with the warmth she'd shown Jake since he'd been assigned to her ship. As one of the few people who had first-hand experience with the Void Hunters, Jake had become an invaluable advisor to the Allied fleet. "The final reconnaissance reports are in," Captain Chun said. "The Void Hunter Advance Fleet is 3 days out from the Proxima system. If our intelligence is correct, the Harvest Fleet will follow within a week." Jake nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to stroke Luna's fur. Through their mental connection, he could feel her analyzing the tactical data that flowed through the ship's information networks. In the months since leaving the mining platform, Luna's abilities had grown tremendously, and she had become an integral part of the Allied forces' communication and coordination systems. "What are our chances?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Honestly," Captain Chun sighed, "without Luna's information about their technology and tactics, we would have been slaughtered. With it, we have a fighting chance. The key is going to be coordination between all these different species and ship classes." Jake looked out at the assembled fleet, marveling at the diversity of vessels and the technological approaches they represented. Sleek human destroyers flew alongside massive crystalline motherships that looked like living organisms. Altarian fighters with their distinctive wing configurations practiced maneuvers with biomechanical dreadnoughts that seemed to shift their configurations in real time. It was Luna who had made this cooperation possible. Her ability to interface with different technological systems had allowed for unprecedented communication between species that had previously found it difficult to coordinate their efforts. More than that, her story had become a symbol of hope that inspired beings across the galaxy. "Captain," Jake said, "I want to request permission to remain on the bridge during the battle." Captain Chun looked surprised. "Jake, you're a civilian advisor, not military personnel. The bridge of a warship during combat is no place for—" "With respect, Captain," Jake interrupted gently, "Luna and I need to be where we can coordinate with the Allied fleet's communication systems. Our connection gives us capabilities that could make the difference in this battle." Captain Chin studied Jake for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Permission granted. But you follow my orders without question, understand? This isn't going to be like fixing broken machinery on a mining platform." Jake smiled grimly. "I understand, Captain. But someone once told me that a person's character is measured by what they do when nobody's watching. Well, the whole galaxy is watching now, and I intend to do everything I can to make sure we all survive this." Luna chirped softly on his shoulder, her mental presence carrying a mix of determination and affection. Through their connection, Jake could feel her preparing for what was to come, drawing on reserves of strength and capability that still amazed him. 3 days later, the Void Hunter Advanced Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima system. Jake watched from the Defiance's bridge as sensor readings filled the main display with enemy signatures. The Void Hunter ships were unlike anything in the Allied database. Dark, angular vessels that seemed to absorb light and energy, making them difficult to target with conventional weapons. Enemy fleet consists of approximately 200 vessels, reported Lieutenant Commander Patel from the sensor station. Ship class is unknown, but energy signatures indicate advanced shield systems and weapons technology. Captain Chun turned to Jake. "This is it. Are you and Luna ready?" Jake nodded, placing his hand on the communication console, where Luna had already begun interfacing with the ship's systems. Through their mental link, he could feel Luna connecting with the entire Allied fleet, creating a network of communication and coordination that no single species could have achieved alone. The battle began with long-range exchanges between the opposing fleets. Void Hunter energy weapons lanced through space with devastating accuracy, but the Allied forces had learned from Luna's warnings. Instead of engaging in traditional formation combat, the diverse species used their unique technological advantages in coordinated strikes. Human ships used their superior maneuverability to conduct hit-and-run attacks, while crystalline vessels provided heavy firepower from protected positions. Altarian fighters swarmed around larger Void Hunter ships, using their speed to exploit weak points that Luna had identified from her species' previous encounters with the enemy. But the real advantage came from something the Void Hunters had never faced before: genuine cooperation between multiple intelligent species. Through Luna's coordination network, the Allied fleet fought as a single organism, each ship and species contributing its strengths while others covered their weaknesses. Jake watched in amazement as the battle unfolded. Human engineering expertise helped optimize crystalline energy systems in real time. Altarian tactical doctrine was enhanced by biomechanical pattern recognition algorithms. And underlying it all was Luna's ability to process information from multiple technological systems simultaneously, creating a level of battlefield awareness that no single species could achieve. The Void Hunters, for all their technological sophistication, were clearly unprepared for this level of coordination. Their tactics relied on overwhelming individual opponents through superior firepower and technology, but the Allied fleet's cooperative approach neutralized many of their advantages. "Enemy flagship is beginning to withdraw," reported Commander Patel. "Several Void Hunter vessels are attempting to break off from the engagement." Through Luna's expanded awareness, Jake could sense confusion and uncertainty from the Void Hunter forces. They had expected to face fractured resistance from various species fighting independently. The unified response had disrupted their strategic calculations. But Jake knew the real test was still to come. The advanced fleet had been meant to soften resistance before the arrival of the Harvest fleet, and that massive force was still approaching. The question was whether the victory here would be enough to make the Void Hunters reconsider their plans for this sector of the galaxy. As the surviving Void Hunter ships retreated into hyperspace, Captain Chun turned to Jake with a mixture of relief and concern. "We won this round, but what happens when a main fleet arrives?" Jake felt Luna's mental presence intensify as she processed data from across the Allied fleet. Images and impressions flowed through their connection, tactical analyses, damage reports, and, most importantly, communications intercept from the retreating Void Hunter vessels. "They're confused," Jake said, translating Luna's insights. The Void Hunters expected to find divided resistance that they could overwhelm systematically. Instead, they encountered something they've never faced before: multiple species working together as equals. "Will that be enough to stop them?" Captain Chen asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, feeling Luna's thoughts merge with his own as she analyzed the broader implications of what had happened. "Luna thinks it might be. The Void Hunter's entire strategy is based on the assumption that intelligent species will compete rather than cooperate when faced with extinction. Our victory here proves that assumption wrong." Over the following days, as the Allied fleet prepared for the arrival of the Harvest fleet, something extraordinary happened. The communications networks that Luna had helped establish began carrying more than tactical information. Scientists from different species started sharing research data. Engineers began collaborating on hybrid technologies that combined the best aspects of multiple civilizations. Cultural exchanges flourished as beings who had never met before discovered common values and shared purposes. The creature that Jake had found dying in a maintenance tunnel had become the catalyst for the greatest period of interspecies cooperation in galactic history. Not through conquest or domination, but through the simple demonstration that compassion and mutual aid could overcome any challenge. When the Void Hunter Harvest fleet finally arrived, a massive armada that dwarfed their advance force, they found something unprecedented waiting for them. Not just a military alliance, but a true confederation of species united by shared purpose and mutual respect. The battle that followed lasted for 3 days and reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. But it wasn't the victory of weapons or technology that defeated the Void Hunters. It was the victory of cooperation over competition, compassion over cruelty, and hope over despair. Jake stood on the bridge of the Defiance as the last Void Hunter ships retreated into the depths of space, their harvest plans abandoned. Luna sat on his shoulder, her soft purr vibrating with satisfaction and contentment. Through their mental connection, Jake felt her gratitude for the journey they had taken together. "Thank you," he whispered to her, knowing that she understood not just the words but the depth of meaning behind them. "Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to." Luna's response came not in words but in emotions, love, trust, and an unshakable faith in the power of beings to care for each other across all the barriers of species, culture, and understanding. Captain Chun approached them, her face showing the exhaustion of command during the longest battle of her career. "So what happens now?" she asked. "With the Void Hunters retreated and this alliance we've built?" Jake looked out at the mixed fleet of ships from dozens of different worlds, each one representing a species that had chosen cooperation over isolation. "Now we prove that what we've built here can last. Luna's people may be gone, but their message lives on in all of us. The galaxy is big enough for everyone, as long as we're willing to look out for each other." Luna chirped once in agreement, her pale blue eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the viewport. In those eyes, Jake saw the future, not the dark harvest that the Void Hunters had planned, but a galaxy where species helped each other not because they had to, but because they chose to. The small albino creature that had nearly drowned in contaminated water had taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the difference between extinction and survival was as simple as one being choosing to care for another, regardless of the cost. And in making that choice, Jake had discovered that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than he had ever imagined. Not because of its technology or its vast distances, but because of its infinite capacity for compassion when beings chose to extend it to each other. The galaxy would remember Luna's story for generations to come, but Jake knew that the real lesson wasn't about alien creatures or galactic threats. It was about the moment when someone chose to help instead of walking away, to care instead of remaining indifferent, to risk everything for the simple principle that life, all life, was worth protecting. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, and it was a gift that would echo through the stars long after the ships had returned home and the immediate crisis had passed. In the end, it wasn't advanced technology or superior firepower that had saved civilization. It was something much simpler and infinitely more powerful, the decision to be kind when kindness seemed impossible. Hashtag the Mechanic's Discovery, story hook in the vast expanse of space. Where countless alien civilizations have risen and fallen, there exists a simple truth that echoes through the cosmos. When the universe shows its cruelest face, humanity shows its kindest heart. On the industrial moon of Kepler 442c, where the air tastes of metal and hope comes in short supply, a human mechanic named Jake Morrison is about to discover that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can spark a revolution that will shake the very foundations of galactic society. What starts as a routine day fixing broken machinery will become the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that will prove to every species in the galaxy why humans are truly unique, not for their technology or their weapons, but for something far more powerful, their unwavering capacity to care for those who cannot care for themselves. The story you're about to experience will challenge everything you think you know about survival, loyalty, and what it means to be truly civilized in an uncivilized universe.